Good evening. I'm Johanna Evans, Vice President of the White River Indie Fest, and it's my pleasure to kick off tonight's event. Just so you know, you are welcome to submit your questions anytime through the comments field. We hope that you've watched the films and read a little bit about our panelists tonight and come brimming with ideas and questions. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Samantha.
Hi, I'm Samantha Davidson Green. Welcome. We're so glad that you're here. I'm the president of WRIF, White River Indie Films. We are a nonprofit volunteer-run media arts community that's committed to catalyzing change through film. This film series was first conceived to examine threats to our elections, but it took on extra urgency in recent months as we saw the pandemic and police brutality reveal the persistent structural racism that's not only disproportionately killing people of color in this country, but which is undermining the very democratic processes on which the possibility of justice depends. Tonight's conversation, sparked by films John Lewis, Good Trouble, and Time for ILHAN, address change through participation on the candidate side of the story. Who are the brave souls who go first? What does it take to transform activist passion into the grind of campaigning and governing? What do these films have to say about our local politics? The series will continue for the next 2 weeks with films that address the voter side of the story. Films Slay the Dragon, examining high-tech gerrymandering efforts, and Capturing the Flag, which looks at the voter suppression that happened in North Carolina in the 2016 general election. These films stream for free thanks to our sponsors, and on October 6th, we'll gather again in this format with members of both of those filmmaking teams to address issues raised there. Action links and more information about the films and the panelists can be found at RIF.org. I'd like to thank our sponsors and our panelists, our community partners, and all who made this event possible. Without further ado, now I'd like to introduce our moderator. We are so pleased to have Professor Matt Delmont, the Sherman Fairchild Distinguished Professor of History at Dartmouth College, where he serves also as Special Advisor to the President for Faculty Diversity. A Guggenheim Fellow and expert on African American history and the history of civil rights, he is author of many books, including Black Quotidian, Everyday History in African American Newspapers, Why Busing Failed, Race, Media, and National Resistance to School Desegregation, and others. His next book will be Half American, the epic story of African Americans fighting World War II at home and abroad. Originally from Minneapolis, Professor Delmont earned his BA from Harvard and MA and PhDs from Brown. He joined our community last year from Arizona State University. It's our great fortune to have Matt Delmont here to moderate our conversation. Thank you and welcome to all.
Thank you, Samantha, for that nice introduction and for inviting me to moderate the panel this evening. It's a real pleasure to have a chance to meet our panelists this evening to really try to get this conversation going. The films are fascinating. I think our panelists are going to have a lot of really interesting things to say about them. Let me jump right into it, introduce our four panelists. I'll do it in alphabetical order. First, we have Quinton Law, who's a campaign staffer and constituent advocate for New Jersey Senator Cory Booker. In the office of Senator Booker, Quinton acts as a liaison with federal, state, and local agencies on behalf of constituents. He also serves on the Black Outreach team for the senator. As field organizer for the Cory 2020 presidential primary campaign, Quinton built, trained, and managed volunteer teams in communities around the state of New Hampshire. Welcome, Quinton.
Thank you for having me, Matt. I appreciate it. Thank you to RIF for inviting me to be on the panel tonight.
Our next panelist is Kiah Morris, who's the Movement Politics Director for Rights and Democracy, Vermont. Kiah served in the Vermont General Assembly as a state representative from 2014 to 2018. She's the first African-American and person of color elected from Bennington County, and the second African-American woman to be elected to the legislature in Vermont history. In that capacity, she served on the House Judiciary Committee, the Vermont Judicial Nominating Board, and was co-chair of the Tripartisan Legislative Women's Caucus. Kiah, welcome.
Hello, good evening, everyone. So glad to join you all. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Our next panelist is Kesha Ram, who's a candidate for Vermont State Senate. When Kesha was elected to the Vermont House of Representatives in 2008, She became the first person of color in history to represent Burlington. During her time in the legislature, she served on several committees, including Ways and Means, Housing and Military Affairs, and as vice chair of the Natural Resources and Energy Committee. Welcome, Kesha.
Thanks. It's an honor to be with all of you and some esteemed colleagues.
And finally, we have Peter Welch, who you probably know is the Congressman for Vermont. He's been a significant figure in Vermont politics for over 3 decades. He was first elected to represent Windsor County in the Vermont Senate in 1980 and served there until 1989. He continued to practice law in the 1990s before returning to Vermont Senate in 2001. In 2006, he was elected as Vermont's Congressman in the U.S. House of Representatives. Peter is the Chief Deputy Whip of the House Democratic Caucus and a member of the Democratic Steering and Policy Committee. He serves in the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and the House Committee on Energy and Commerce. Peter, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
Congressman Welch only has a limited time with us this evening, so we're going to toss the first question to him before opening up the questions to the rest of the panel. So, Congressman Welch, I wonder if you could just talk about your experiences working with John Lewis and ILHAN Omar.
Well, you know, it's pretty special. I mean, John Lewis, of course, he's been in Congress, had been in Congress for 3 decades. And I went to Congress 14 years ago, and one of the first people I met was John Lewis. And when I was a young person growing up in Western Massachusetts, I have vivid memories of Martin Luther King speaking in Washington. And I remember that there was a young person by the name of John Lewis who also spoke. And the experience I had when I went to Congress is similar to literally every one of my colleagues. And that is, wow, I'm with John Lewis. And all of us who'd had engagement and concern about the civil rights movement were aware of the stories about him. And of course, the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And it was a revered figure in our caucus and really the conscience of our caucus. But the aspect of John that I found so powerful is what I've seen in other civil rights leaders too, is that even though he came, you know, within inches of his life and where he walked into situations where he knew that there was this indiscriminate and vicious and violent hatred towards him, and where he literally got pounded with clubs in steel bars. He was not only gentle, but accepting and forgiving. And it was just an example to all of us in the combat of politics about his vision of the power of action, the power of good trouble, but never to be weighed down by the burden of injustice on him, but to fight it. So he was pretty special. And one of my treasured moments was when I was sitting with him on the floor during a time when we were protesting the failure of the then Republican majority to take up any gun safety legislation after the Connecticut assault. And that was totally unprecedented action for us, but it was tremendous to be with him. ILHAN, I'm getting to know, and I was very close friends with her predecessor, Keith Ellison, who was the first Muslim American to serve in Congress. And of course, ILHAN came, and then she not only was a Muslim American, where there's not, in the climate we're in, where the first thing that President Trump did was ban Muslims from coming to our country. He banned travel from countries targeting Muslims. And ILHAN came, and of course, she wore the hijab. And this was a striking thing to experience. There was a lot of resistance and rejection, even though she was simply presenting herself as who she was and who elected her. And she has got a kind of a steely determination that's quite impressive and powerful. And is a wonderful colleague. And, you know, one of the things that I found so wonderful about that the time for ILHAN, if you noticed when she was interacting with constituents, then voters, before she represented them, she had a very gentle, easy demeanor, no matter what the person was or who it was or what their identity was. It was just a very self-assured, calm presentation. And given the challenges that she faced in life, how in the world did she get the wherewithal to be so confident? You know, the first time I was running for office, I was so nervous that when I went to get signatures down in Windsor, Vermont, I came home with 3 bags of groceries and no signatures because I was afraid to tell people. And ILHAN, after all that she's been through, that she could just present herself as to be a representative in Minnesota and then to be a member of Congress was pretty inspiring to me. And it's that, you know, there are people who, no matter what their circumstances, you know, John Lewis growing up in Troy, tiny little town where black kids couldn't go to the library. They didn't have a library, where they really couldn't go to school, where he had to do farm chores and then walk a long time. And it's no big deal for him. So there's a measure of respect and great admiration that one who has had the opportunity to be with ILHAN and to have been with John for so long, you just can't help but be inspired by. But, you know, I want to say something else. You know, John Lewis, who I had much more personal contact with, just think of the 1965 Voting Rights Act that he played a major role in getting passed. And since then, it's been a constant attack to go back to rolling that back and essentially try to re-embrace in a way a new Jim Crow. And he endured through that and just continued to be inspiring. And of course, in the House of Representatives, we passed the John Lewis Voting Rights Act this year. And Senator McConnell sees that as a threat, but we'll have a chance next year. But I want to talk about something else that has happened that really is, from my perspective, in this terrible year we're in with COVID, 200,000 American citizens die. This president who tramples the norms of democracy. The Black Lives Matter movement that has been here, but is now really become so constructive, is the most positive force that I'm seeing. And you know, when we saw that, and here's why. I've been trying to figure that out. Because when that officer had his knee on the neck of George Floyd for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, that was not just a horrific thing that we all witnessed. It wasn't just a bad man doing a very, very bad thing. What shocked me as much as anything, maybe more than anything, was how casual that officer was. He was out in plain sight with his colleagues, with citizens taking videos. He had his hands in his pocket. He was relaxed. And what does that tell you? What it tells me is that he felt that what he was doing was okay. He had a culture behind him. And what has happened, I think, with Black Lives Matter is that reality, that the culture is reinforcing the right to do things to people on the basis of the color of their skin. That is the legacy of slavery. And of course, Europeans came to this continent and did 2 things. Remove people who lived here, indigenous people, from their home, and kidnapped people in Africa from their home and brought them here. And we had those centuries of slavery, and then a brief period where in Reconstruction, African Americans, freed slaves, were allowed to get an education, participate in science and culture and the arts, in politics, went to Congress, and did extremely well. And then the reaction, Jim Crow in the end of Reconstruction, and legalized lynching, looking the other way. Mm-hmm. And Black Lives Matter, I think, is revealing to those who have not experienced what John Lewis has experienced, what Ilhan Omar has experienced, is that, yes, everybody suffers. Life involves suffering. And we're all going to have it if we haven't experienced it already. It awaits us. But what is so, I think, revealing about the Black Lives Matter movement is that we're seeing that much of this pain, when it's inflicted on the basis of the color of a person's skin, that's not the existential suffering that each and every one of us at some point or other has to contend with. And that's the institutional racism, the systemic racism, that those who have experienced it in direct ways, in subtle ways, are now finding some awareness being understood by the rest of America. So that, as tough as this year is, and as unbelievable as this president is, it's so inspiring to me to see folks like Kesha in Vermont and Kiah, who's my friend from the, both of you have been so tremendous, but you have, you have endured this and you've seen it. And one of the things I saw in Congress with ILHAN and John is that there was a gulf between what the reality of the life was that John led and what the reality of the life that ILHAN led. And none of us who weren't in their shoes could necessarily experience it, but you can want to understand it and have some empathy and some understanding, some curiosity of one human to another. And that has been wiped out, and it's for many here, Black and brown citizens. So I think these movies, these films that reveal this and honor the lives and the struggles of these wonderful Americans, ILHAN and John, that provoke our discussion and engagement are extremely, extremely valuable. So I thank my fellow panelists for being with me. I look forward to working with you in solidarity in days ahead. And all of you who are on this call with Professor Delmont, I really, really am humbled to be with you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Congressman Welch, thank you so much for joining us and for those powerful words to get us started. To kind of kick off our conversation and kind of continue in this direction, both of the films talk about activism and electoral politics in different ways. And so I wonder if we could ask the panelists to talk about, as Congressman Welch said, we're in an unprecedented era, and sort of thinking about what it means to be involved with electoral politics in the era of Black Lives Matter. Can we have that be our first question? And Kiah, could I ask you to get us started? What does it mean to be involved in electoral politics in the era of Black Lives Matter?
Well, what it means right now is it's showing a really clear necessity for direct representation from impacted communities. What we have right now is a system where people are represented by proxy. So, while we ask the question of like, how can a person from a particular identity represent so many other different groups? Here's the reality is that we have had folks from singular identities and from singular demographics and from constituencies that have been representing all of us and doing so incorrectly and in some ways harmfully. And so what this moment is saying to people is that we have to be the ones in the room. If we are not the ones that are actually asking and pressing the questions, that are having the difficult conversations, that are sometimes not graceful in what we have to say, we don't have the patience and we don't have the calm and the serenity that's necessary in order to kind of placate the difficult emotions that come with the kind of transformative work we need to do, that if we're not there, then those things will not fundamentally change. So what it is there's people wanting to step up and step into this work in some really deep and meaningful ways. And so there's kind of two parts to your question, right? So the first part is around what does activism mean as it relates to electoral politics? And as I've done many trainings for candidates, you talk about the fact that once you go from being the activist to the electorate, that person that's in that elected seat, there is a change in relationship to your constituencies and your communities. That distrust, that well-earned distrust that people have for our democracy and the way that our government works, our bureaucratic systems that they work, that's going to now be, you're part of that system now, for right or for wrong. And so it is still constant work that you have to do and be centered and rooted in your values and understanding what brought you there, what made you fight to make those seats happen, and the promises that you are supposed to hold deep and central to your very being. as you step into that space. That relationship and that dynamic does change. But so as we saw with Representative Lewis, and we've seen even here in Vermont and in different places, sometimes you bring that activism as well to the floor of the places where you're at. It is sometimes a powerful act to stand in solidarity, to link arms, to get arrested, to go be out there in the streets with the protests. And yeah, we've seen city councilwomen and we've seen people getting maced in the face that were elected officials that were out there to support their constituencies. And so there is this necessity to have a direct connection to what's happening on the streets. Now, what that also means, though, again, is that once you are in that space, once you are stepping into that space, that you are also visible in a very different way. So while as an activist, you might have been a leader that might have had some measure of sort of a spotlight on you, so to speak, and that's what brought you to the space of being able to pull in folks to believe in your campaign, recognizing that now you're going to be hyper visible. And so in this moment of Black Lives Matter, when we are finding that everyday individuals are being murdered without recourse, and with the world just continuing on as though nothing has really changed, that you are also still hyper visible and in some ways very a target yourself. You will potentially place yourself as a target yourself. And so as ILHAN's husband said, somebody's going to make these sacrifices, but we have to switch from a martyrdom to a different level of what we're asking about service and what that means to serve.
Thank you so much, Kiah. Kesha, can I ask for your response to the same question?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, so I think of it a lot as the ability to exercise leadership, whether you have formal authority or informal authority. So, you know, a lot of times we think, okay, I don't have a particular title, I don't have an elected role, so I don't have any power. But in fact, you have a lot of power. And I think there's just different types of power, right? So there's personal power, which relies a lot on charisma and one's ability to articulate their vision. There's social power, which we saw a lot of from, you know, the early community organizing days of Congressman Lewis and Congressman Omar. And then they gained institutional power by being elected and sort of had the power of those foundational government roles behind them. But then you saw what Congressman Welch pointed out, which is they never had systemic power. You know, not until the day Congressman Lewis died, you know, rest in power, did he have systemic power. Did he feel the ability to walk into the halls of Congress and know that there was a legacy that supported him? And of course, for Congresswoman Omar, you know, every day that she walks in, she's reminded of people wanting to strip her of her institutional power because of that lack of systemic power. So I think, you know, I think it can be really lonely to be who we are in government sometimes. I think maybe as a person of color, you know, with brown skin, not with black skin even, you know, but just watching Black leaders and the extra work they had to constantly do to organize their communities and maintain their social and personal power so that they could battle that systemic power every day that was trying to hold them and their communities back.
Great. Thank you, Kesha. Quinton, kind of same question for you, but I wondered, you're in New Jersey, and I wonder if you could speak to what it means to be in politics at this moment, Black Lives Matter era, but particularly working with constituents in a city where the racial demographics are different than it is up here in Vermont, New Hampshire.
Thank you, Matt. And honestly, to speak to that, I think this quote is perfect. It's actually from John Lewis, in saying that ours is not the struggle of one day, 1 week, or 1 year, but ours is the struggle of ours is also not the struggle of one judicial appointment or presidential term. Ours is the struggle of a lifetime, or maybe even many lifetimes, and each one of us is in every generation must do our part. So I feel like, you know, when you think about that quote from John Lewis, Congressman John Lewis, rest in power, that, you know, we have to realize that this is an everyday fight, and we have to constantly put in this work day in and day out. And, you know, politics and being an activist in the era of Black Lives Matter, especially in New Jersey, and that's a very diverse state, very segregated state, though, you have to realize that that power is in community. And I think we're seeing that all across the country. The first thing that you notice in these Black Lives Matter protests this time around, as opposed to 2015, is that I feel like they're way more multicultural. There's much more of a groundswell movement and people that are getting out there when it's no longer in the headlines saying, no, Black lives still matter, and we're going to still keep this fight up every day. I don't care if I have to, take the time off on the weekends or whatever I need to do. So I think that is what has came out of this is the groundswell of community. And you see it across the country, whether it's in Kentucky, where Charles Booker, a well-known activist, almost took the Senate nomination from far out frontrunner Amy McGrath, or Cori Bush in Mississippi, I believe, who won her seat against Lacy Clay, who was a 50-year political dynasty. These are activists on the ground, and AOC, we all know her story, but these are activists on the ground that are bringing people together around a cause, which is Black lives, and ultimately that we need that system that Kesha spoke about. We need that institutional power that we so often don't have, not even in politics, but also in business boardrooms or college boards of trustees. We need to get more people of color into these positions of executive decision making, and I think that is what's coming now, is building that community power for Black lives, and it's a groundswell. And being in New Jersey, you see that all the time. There are protests in the in your Newark, Jersey City, Camden, New Jersey, which are predominantly Black and brown cities, and then in your white Philadelphia and New York suburbs, you're seeing Black Lives Matter protests. So I think in this moment, it is about uniting around that cause and not giving up. And what Congressman Lewis said is this is a lifetime for many generations. So we must do our part, and I think people are really starting to see that.
Thank you, Quinton. I think one of the things I found really powerful about watching these two films together is just the time span they cover. So with Representative Lewis, you have someone who had sort of decades-long career in politics. Then with Representative Omar, someone who's just sort of taking off, and really the good fortune of the documentary team to sort of capture a rising star, someone who hopefully has decades ahead of her. You all have lots of experience with campaigns. And so I wonder if you could talk about your own experiences with campaigning, particularly what I think the films show about the real barriers in terms of people of color running for office. Welcome, maybe Kiah, could you get us started with this one again?
Sure. There are a number of barriers. I mean, obviously, I don't know if you caught that, but ILHAN's husband literally had to take a leave of absence from his own work to be able to help support their family and to be able to support her in her candidacy. That's not something that's actually available to a lot of people. I mean, we're in places that don't even have paid sick leave. So the ability to be able to sacrifice financially and the sacrifices that you'll have on family are there. Those are very, very real. We need to think about public financing of campaigns because the amount that's required is incredibly difficult. What I think both candidates were able to show within their work and what we know and have felt in our bones and experienced from firsthand as well is that the level of support that you receive can be varied. It can be wildly varied. I was fascinated watching ILHAN's run for Congress and seeing this incredible team of all these people who were coming through and doing all of this work. I had zero. I had 1.5 persons, but they were on a super part-time basis to help me with a couple of graphics and some social media. I had 2 people knock on doors with me in the entirety of my first run of my campaign. My local, party, really, they think they gave me like $200 for my whole experience. I did not have that, but I pushed through and I won anyway. We should not have to have, as Kesha was talking about, there's so many barriers that we're already overcoming just to even get our foot in the door to be able to start running a campaign that are very much in place on purpose to keep people from being able to engage. Mm-hmm. We do have the very real aspects as well of talking about what racism means for a person in these candidacies, how they have to situate themselves. And the times when I've spoken with candidates and they're like, well, I don't want to really bring race into my candidacy. I'm here for everyone. I'm here to represent everyone. Like, yeah, no, we got that. However, the voting populace is dealing with questions of race right now. Mm-hmm. Your constituents are going to be dealing with race every single day of their lives. There is not a point in time where it is not a part of their narrative. And so not feeling confident of being able to do that also speaks to not only the fear of what you will receive from the backlash that will happen from those that are opposed to your candidacy, but as well as the very real physical threats that could also happen in this moment in time. We often are representing districts that have the highest rates of poverty and do have sometimes the highest concentrations of folks that look like us, our Black and brown folks, our folks from the global majority. So we're not stepping into this with immediate big dollar donors that are going to be able to be available to help buoy us through these processes. And then there's also the feeling that you have to do 10 times more just to be seen and heard, and whether or not you are qualified. We heard about that, didn't we? Right? Whether or not you were qualified to run, whether or not you are deserving of this opportunity, and the places where you're told it's not your turn and you should step back. And those are not questions that white males think about. Those are often not even questions that white women think about. But they're questions that are absolutely pressed. And I want to lift up and honor, and I hope you all recognize the important historical moment that Kesha is in right now in running to become the first woman of color to get a Senate seat in our state legislature. And I will tell you that when I tried to do that same thing a few years ago, I was told by political strategists that you have to raise $40,000 to even be competitive. Not how can we help you raise $40,000 to make sure you're competitive because you should run. But we need to tell you about those barriers that you're going to have to figure out how to overcome on a bootstrappy kind of conversation. And that's where people say, I'm not qualified. I'm not ready. This isn't something that I can do. So that loneliness that Kesha talked about that's real. That's real from the day you've put in those petitions all the way up to when you actually get into that seat. And that loneliness it's real. It's very real for many.
Thanks, Kiah. Kesha, just picking up on that, what gave you the power to overcome that and push through?
Oh, well, I mean, first of all, I just want to honor Kiah because we kind of stand on each other's shoulders and continue to lift each other up. And I wouldn't be able to do it without women like her having, really blown a hole in the narrative about Vermont, that it is, pastoral and peaceful, and, that we have racism deeply rooted here and hatred. And I think where we are is I want to say it's different only in the sense that we're able to say to people, okay, after the book club book, pick up your checkbook and pay for the change that you want to see. I have benefited. I felt like in the middle of the pandemic, I stopped fundraising. And yet in the wake of George Floyd, and not that I felt like I wanted to benefit from that in some way, but so many people would say, I don't know what else to do, but, give to the NAACP, give to Rights and Democracy, give to, some local Boys and Girls Club or whatever, and to the first woman of color who's going to be in the state Senate in Vermont. So, it was a real moment to say, we're here. We've been here. We're not going anywhere. But thank you for finally recognizing it and putting your money, investing in us as candidates. And I just want to say, when I think of the two films, they can feel so different in some ways. They're different stories. They're told in different ways. They've captured different pieces of their lives. But they both really apex with this moment that we're in with Trump and, now on top of that, for a lot of people reeling from losing Ruth Bader Ginsburg, just where we are as a country. When you watch them experience those moments, the 2016 election, the 2018 election, the anti-Muslim sentiment, the Muslim country ban, you'd watch them watch the news and go, okay, what are we going to do tomorrow? And that I think is the reality for a lot of Black, Indigenous, and people of color folks in the country is, we have never had time to despair and say, I don't know what to do. I'm lost. These are people who've been beaten or kept out of, institutions or, told they weren't good enough, or had their kids threatened at school, or like Kiah, been threatened at home. We don't have the luxury to say, I'm just not going to get up in the morning. That doesn't work for our kids. That doesn't work for the young people that look up to us. So we might lose, and we still have to get up and go on. And that, I think, is more universal. And it's where we're faced with the emotion of what it feels like to do that as a person of color, a woman of color. But, when I ran statewide and lost and got like high double digit teen vote, like the first woman of color, to get double digits in a statewide race. Someone pulled me aside and they said, when Bernie was your age and he ran, he only got 2%. So, you know, you're doing fine. So we have to remember too that losing is just part of politics as well. You know, it just hurts more when you've heard a lot of terrible racially charged, you know, sexist remarks, you know, about you the whole way. And the question I think in that moment is, can you keep enough of who you are so that win or lose, your soul is intact at the end of your race? And I think that's what we face as people of color a lot in our races.
Thanks, Kesha. I'm going to pause for a minute here and encourage folks who are watching on YouTube or on Facebook. You can enter questions in the comment function, and then we can ask those of the panelists as well. Quinton, I have a different question to ask for you and ask you to respond to this one first. So one crossover moment we saw in the film was when Representative Omar says that John Lewis taught her to love your country like you love yourself. I wonder if you could just reflect on what that means. I mean, as a person of color in the United States, someone working in politics, when you hear that statement, love your country like you love yourself, how do you respond to it?
Well, first thing, Matt, is I want to congratulate Kesha for her historic campaign and Kiah for paving the way, because that, you know, cannot go be you know, left without being addressed. That's amazing, and there's the only way that we can continue to push against this system that constantly oppresses people of color is to keep challenging, and if we do take those losses, you know, get back up and attack it again. And to address your question, Matt, I think that, you know, we were always told growing up, young Black and brown children, that, you know, we do have to be twice as better and we do have to work twice as harder just to get just as far. And that, you know, I think that mentality, you know, when you think about the, you know, and say it one more time, Matt, the quote from John.
Love your country like you love yourself.
Yeah, love your country like you love yourself. What that means to me is, it reminds me of another quote from one of my favorite politicians. It's like, you cannot love your country unless you love your fellow countrymen and women. And I think it's about, you know, you get what you give, and it's about putting in that effort and putting in that fight. And I think, you know, all the criticisms that ILHAN and John may have about their country. I mean, John literally came this close to losing his life, standing up for something that he believed in a country. And I think at the end of the day, it's because he's in a country that he truly believes can change at some point. Maybe not now, but down the road. And I think that when that quote comes to mind, that's what I think of. It's like, you know, this is a never-ending fight, like I've been saying, and we have to keep pushing, and we have to keep the pressure on, because it comes from a place of love. It doesn't come from a place of, you know, I hate this country or I hate what has happened to me, but I have a belief that this can truly be better if people buy into it and if we can bring people together. Because, you know, if you're not going to go far going alone, but you will go far together. So that's my answer to that.
Great, thanks, Quinton. Kiah or Kesha, can I ask for either of you to respond to it?
Go ahead, Kesha.
Thanks. So, you know, I think that, I guess what was stuck in my mind as I was listening to Quinton talk and thinking about ILHAN's story particularly is that we can't keep expecting Black Americans to save our country and to save our democracy and to be our conscience and to be our better selves as Americans. It's exhausting, and it's, you know, in the face of violence and hostility and the possibility of death and losing everything. And it just, I worry about that narrative, and it's such an ongoing battle for our identity as a country. We can't have reconciliation until we have truth. And, you know, it's Black folks who can help bring the reconciliation because it's in their, you know, it's in their purview to forgive and to be that other half of the reconciliation. But white people have to acknowledge the truth, and it's very, very hard for them to do. And so, you know, I think, do many people of color, and particularly Black Americans, love the country as they love themselves? Probably more than they should. but the question is, what are white people doing? Are they ready to stand up and, really love the country, accept its flaws, and fight to make it better? Or do they or are we just sort of accepting who we are, accepting our country as, what it is? And I think that's the question, is a lot of people are saying, I don't want to change. I don't want this country to change. I'm happy with the status quo, even though we see a lot of despair and struggle. So I feel like there's a real dichotomy in this country. And I would love to love this country as much as John Lewis did. I think we all would. But we can't keep expecting that of the John Lewises of the world unless we're all willing to do it equally.
Yeah, it's a great answer. We have our first question in online. This is from Reeve Green. What specific priority are each of you most focused on to accomplish or work on for the next 5 weeks until November 3rd?
Kiah, you haven't answered.
Whoever.
Sorry, I'm trying to be moderator. I'm sorry.
Sure. So, through the work that I do through Rights and Democracy, we're working to lift up candidates and try to get them into office up and down the ballot, from everywhere, from the governor and the Congress, all the way down to your high bailiffs in your local communities. So we are deeply invested in trying to make sure that we're making a difference. I am personally participating in multiple conversations on this and trying to encourage folks to really think differently about what's going to happen in the next 5 weeks. So we say that there's this timestamp of an actual election that will happen, but we have to get voters to actually step into this work. If I take a teeny point of privilege, watching John Lewis's story really struck me because in there, I don't know if you remember them talking about the 3 civil rights workers that died, Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman, down in Philadelphia, Mississippi. My family's directly linked to that story, as my great-grandfather was one of the victims that was savagely beaten before they burned down our family's church, right? And so they had welcomed in those gentlemen to come and investigate the church bombings, and then were murdered later on. They were doing that because they were starting a freedom school with the goal of being able to make sure that people can vote, making sure that Black folks have the right to vote. And so for me, even going back to the previous question about the love that we have, I recognize fully that it is that love of them willing to sacrifice their very lives so that I could have that ability to vote that compels me to try to help everyone vote as much as possible. And we have those systemic barriers right here, right now, that are echoes of the past. And I cannot let what happened to them, I cannot let those youth that stood up and died, were murdered for my ability to vote. I cannot let that go in vain. And so I'm working hard to try to help get out ways to teach people how to do your mail-in ballots. And another step that we're trying to take is trying to explain people even how you can continually feed into telling your Secretary of States what they need to know about how to make voting more accessible. So much that people don't know because there's a shame around it and they recognize the gravity and are afraid to ask for help. So if I was going to say those are the 2 things that I'm carrying pretty heavy right now between here and there, those are definitely that. But I also need to reach out to our constituencies. We need to reach out to our different communities, as unfortunately we're concerned about our protests, our beautiful, peaceful protests turning violent. And so how do we help support and buoy those communities that are fighting and are speaking up and saying we need to be heard right now?
Thank you.
I mean, that really speaks for me, I'll just say, and I think the only other thing I'll add is that we just have to really meditate on anytime you're thinking, what if this one person gets elected, or what if this vote happens, or, just think, what can I do? What's within my power? Your basic power, the most important one we have in this country, is to vote, and then to help others vote, and then to focus on the issues you care about, and then to help the people get elected that you want to see change the country, and on, and to pick up trash in your neighborhood, and to help somebody who's sleeping on the street. And so I think those are continually the things that give us gratitude and help keep us stable and sane, regardless of what happens on November 3rd and in the ensuing days, because we can't be in such deep despair in the next 5 weeks that we're unable to function regardless of the outcome. And I don't want to posit any particular outcome, but whatever happens, we're still a deeply divided country, and we need to heal, and we need to start with our own communities.
Yeah, I totally agree with Kesha as well. I think, between now and November 3rd, you got to have a voting plan. Have to have some sort of plan to get out there and vote. Not just you. Make sure that your family members and your closest friends are registered to vote. I'm on the younger end. I have a lot of friends that are still trying to recognize the reason why they should vote, even though that they haven't. You would think, how can you not know by that now, like how important it is? But the reality is some people just aren't as politically engaged as we all are. So I think the most important thing that you can do now is talk to your friends, make sure that everyone's registered to vote. Also, the most effective way, if you have the means to use your money, is to donate directly to candidates. You could start with your local candidates of color, Kesha and the people that Kiah and her group support. That is one of the most direct and beneficial ways to help your candidates. We also have other candidates of color across the country. You have Reverend Ralph Warnock in Georgia running for Senate. You have Mike Espy in Mississippi running for Senate. You have Sarah Gideon a little closer to Vermont that's in Maine running a contested race. So, get involved, look around the country, see where you can help, and try to, if you can, donate. If you have the time, donate your time to make calls, because it makes the world of a difference. And that can be the difference. In Hanover, if I remember correctly, there was a Senate race that was decided by a few thousand votes. Wasn't that what happened a few years ago? And I know the Dartmouth teens at University of Dartmouth Dems, they wear that with pride, because they registered so many students. In Hanover and at Dartmouth. So, just get out there, talk to your friends, make sure you're aware of local races that you could possibly donate your time or money to, and then look at the national Senate races that are close. I named some: Mississippi, Maine, North Carolina. Oh, and Jamie Harrison in South Carolina running against Lindsey Graham. So look up your races and please get involved any way that you can. Don't let your inability to do everything stop you from doing something. Your work is so valuable, and your time is so valuable at any level. So that's what I would prioritize before now on election day.
Thanks, Quinton. The next question is about what it means to be an ally and a good ally. This is from Fallon, who asks, what suggestions do you have for white young people who want to work toward racial justice here in Vermont but are not yet able to vote or are disillusioned with the political system?
Well, Fallon, I don't know if that applies to you, but it's pretty impressive that you're here watching this panel as a potential high school student or just a young person. I give you credit for listening to the stories of people of color and helping to carry that message further. If you have people of color in your school or in your district, even if you don't and there's bullying or harassment, I can tell you, if there are kids of color at your school, particularly Black kids, they're probably going through a lot of difficult experiences at school. The kind of Trump rhetoric has come to our schools. People think it's funny. There's swastikas, there's the kind of Trump messaging, there's, people throwing racial slurs around. I work in schools with young people particularly, and I can tell you, I've seen it in every school I'm working in. So, if you have kids of color who are working on a particular effort at your school, please support them. If there's not something happening at your school, help start it. Make sure there's books written by authors of color in the library. Make sure that you're trying to bring speakers and role models that identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color to your school. Start there, because young people are seeing that polarized attitude and they're mimicking it on either side. And that stops us all from asking questions and being curious about each other's experiences and helping you be better than us, better than who's in Congress. That's what we want for you, is to do better than us. So, start by trying to build those relationships in your school.
My
Great.
camera brought up, so I don't know if I was supposed to answer that. They're like, tag, you're it.
I can move to the next question if you don't have anything you want to contribute there.
Well, I mean, I think what Kesha said was really, really powerful and important. And just as well, thinking through like, how can you seed your voice in certain spaces? You want to both use your voice to help uplift and to recognize and to call out when you're seeing acts that are happening, when you're seeing dynamics that are wrong, when you're seeing inaction taking places in the spaces and places that you live, work, play, all of those things. However, if there are opportunities and if you get that moment to seed your voice so that someone else can speak, so that that person who's underrepresented would have an opportunity to have their voice brought forward, that can be one of the most powerful ways for learning. And that doesn't mean as well that it's their job to teach you, nor does it mean that it's that they have to speak, because sometimes that pain is too much to want to have to put on display. But recognizing that if sometimes just being quiet long enough will allow for somebody else to feel the space to then speak up and speak forward. So that's a simple way. Otherwise, read up, study up. There's lots of groups. There's lots of trainings. There's lots of workshops. There's lots of Facebook Lives that are going on for people trying to step into this work. So thank you for doing that.
Thanks, Kiah. The next question is from Othniel Malcolm Andrew Harris, who I should mention is going to be speaking on the October 6th panel as the Director of Voter Protection for the North Carolina Democratic Party. And they ask, working towards justice is hard. John Lewis and other civil rights heroes kept the faith and kept pushing. As freedom fighters yourselves, where does your own strength and resiliency come from?
I can take that one if you'd like. First off, thank you, Othniel, close friend and colleague, former Cory 2020 staffer, for that question. I think that, you know, this fight for me, I'm the son of teen parents, high school dropouts, coming from a biracial family that, you know, we have had to deal with this question of race and identity literally my whole life, every single day. And when I think about, you know, in what it means to be in this fight, it means to me some of what was said earlier, you know, and it goes back to that moment in the film when John Lewis said that he found out that his great grandfather was the last person in his family to vote. And, you know, he broke down in tears and cried. You know, and just cried and cried and cried because, you know, he couldn't believe that, you know, his family has foregone such an important right for so long. And I think that's what gives me my strength. It's like, you know, my parents didn't have the opportunity. They were raising children, you know, they didn't have the opportunity to go to school and pursue an education. And just being able to stand on the shoulders of the people that have sacrificed so much to see me where I am, that pushes me every day. And there's so many people that wish, I know that they wish they could have gone back. I have conversations with my dad all the time before coronavirus. You know, I took him to a few political events, and he looked at me and he said, "Hey, Quinton, you know, I wish I did this when Obama was running for president. I wish I've been doing this. This is amazing." And, you know, it's to hear that coming from your father, you know, he said, "I will never miss another election for the rest of my life." And he never even considered voting. He would do Democrat on the presidential elections, and that was it. But now he's, you know, watching the news, reading, and really elevated his step, and just being able to empower, you know, your parent and empower, you know, your friends. And I'm sure Kesha and Kiah can speak to the same thing. You know, you've seen people in your life that are relatively apolitical, but then become empowered because they see, you know, how important this fight is. So I think that's what keeps me in this fight, even on the bad days and even on the days when you experience racism or discrimination, that, you know, there's people that are counting on you and you can't let them down.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Thanks, Quinn. Kesha?
Sure. I can share that, you know, for me, as I said, you know, it's interesting to feel how historically rooted I am in this work. And it's something that, you know, even as an adult, it took me time to really like reflect on that, because it was just, these are the family stories. This is just what we did. This was just a life that we lived, you know. But seeing the incredible difference and the impact that it makes, seeing how my stepping into office helped support other people to say, if she can do it, I can do it. To see how being in those spaces and using that power. So even though I don't have political power in an electoral sense where I can cast a ballot, I still have a voice that has meaning and influence that can push these systems that are willing to yield into making some pretty important changes. And that's not going to happen universally. I don't think I'm changing the insurance industry anytime. Like, I don't think they're going to be like, suddenly like, oh, well, Kiah said so. Let's all just change how we're doing business. But in the spaces and places that I can make a difference, it is exponential and it is powerful and there is a readiness. And so we have to just keep pushing on because others did that. And, you know, we can keep doing that. So that's what keeps buoying me. And it is exhausting. And it doesn't mean that I'm always like waking up with a smile on my face. And there's plenty of days that I cry. And there's plenty of days that I'm exhausted. And there's days that I'm frustrated as hell that I don't get to be present for my child because I have to be working on this work all day and all night. Like that, those are the things that are not right about this moment. But the things that are right are really key. And I can't yield some of that. I can't change that until I get more people up into this fight. So that's why we got to go get more guys, get more gals, got to get more people up in here. And that's how I feel like it keeps me moving forward and gives me strength and hope.
Thanks, Kiah. Kesha?
Yeah, I mean, you know, just hearing Quinton particularly and hearing Kiah, but, you know, I get to hear Kiah like so much more. But, you know, Quinton, your story is amazing and it gives me that hope. And I don't even know how much, you know, sort of younger you are than me. I'm also, if I'm elected, going to be the youngest woman ever in the state Senate. But I feel like I'm talking about young people. And I try to say that young people, they don't give me hope because I don't want to make them feel the burden of this all on their own. We need to be flanking them. And so I say young people give me courage to do what's necessary and to sort of make the world a little better for them, or at least make their way safer as they try to change the world. And so, you know, I really value them. I do that, you know, Alan, it sounds like you're a teacher, so I couldn't see your picture well enough to see you were a student or teacher. But, you know, invite me to speak at your school, invite Kiah and Quinton. You know, it really is that me. I don't know what's happening, but it's really important that we get access to young people and they get access to us. So that continues to feed me and nourish me and give me courage.
Thanks, Kesha. Our last question is about something that's in the news right now, and it's more, I think, at the sort of national level, but I would be interested in your responses to it. Leora asks, given that one of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's most memorable dissents was in the minority when voting rights were rolled back, what do you think our representatives can do to preserve the integrity of the Supreme Court nomination process?
How to sound hopeful. Yeah. Well, thanks, Leora. You know, Leora, I just want to, on a point of personal privilege, has been a supporter and is a great, you know, is someone who goes beyond the book club book and really, you know, helps support candidates and support local movements. I feel like it's, the sad part is it's kind of like asking, you know, how do we preserve our forward momentum on gun safety, right? Like after Sandy Hook, it just felt like if we don't do something now, when are we going to do something? And after Merrick Garland, you know, we lost that integrity in a big way. And it feels like we're constantly on the left trying to figure out what integrity even looks like anymore. Is it the integrity to fight back in a very concerted way and to get down in the mud and sort of sully our institutions as we're seeing happen? Or does, you know, preserving the integrity mean letting this happen and trying to find the right remedy within the existing system? But the system not only was broken, but just got sort of smashed against the wall. So I'm a bit on the side of the former, that we should stop business as usual and fight for our rights with every fiber of our being. And that might not look like preserving the integrity of the Supreme Court nomination process. as I grew up believing it had integrity. It might look really different than that, but it might mean preserving the rights of people who are otherwise going to be in a world of pain when there are 6 very conservative Supreme Court justices on the Supreme Court. That's all I got.
Thanks, Kesha. So we actually had one more question come in just before the wire, and I think Kiah, this is a good one for you if you don't mind addressing it. It's from Richard Kramer. It says, how can we find more people of color to run for elected offices across Vermont, from school boards and select boards to the state house?
I mean, we know that often, just in general, when you're trying to get folks to run, you got to ask them. So that's the first part. You got to ask them. It's not a question that we typically ask ourselves. It's not something that we wake up in the morning like, I should run for office. Usually like, I need to pay my bills. Okay, so the first part is to ask them. And ask them if that's something that they want to do. And it's not just, I think it's going to be really important. And I sort of teased this a little bit earlier. It's important to not just ask people to run, but to figure out how you're going to help support them throughout the campaign process. And as Kesha was saying, we need you as a whole person once you get into office, and support you through that once you actually get in as well. We need to be able to show people a roadmap of how we're in it for the long haul. We're not just doing it as a transactional basis. We need you in that seat, so we're going to give you these votes and thank you. You know, peace be with you. But instead, we're going to truly hold and own the fact that we have asked this person to step into service. And so we, as well as a society and as communities, have to continue to support them in tangible ways so that they can govern effectively. Without that roadmap, I can't tell you how many people we lose. How many people we ask to run and they're like, it's just not worth it. I can't do it. I can't figure out how I'm going to make it work. How am I supposed to make this work with my kid? You know, I'm a single mom and I have to leave my government job that's paying me good benefits and gives me health care to go run for office that I might lose. It's a huge ask. It's an enormous ask. So as Kesha was saying, and as you know, she knows I'm all about this. The ways that we've been doing it are not right. They're not functional and they are lethal for our communities. So we have to change it significantly. So I think that's going to be the key, asking and then creating an actual plan and a promise that you're going to deliver on how you'll be able to help support those individuals as they choose to put themselves front and center into this work.
Thank you so much, Kiah. I think that's a good point for us to end on. I've learned a huge amount from all 3 of you. It was a real pleasure to have a chance to meet all of you virtually and to learn from you this evening. Normally, this is when I turn to the audience and ask them to join me in giving you a round of applause. So picture 200 people clapping for you right now. And thanks again for taking time out of your evening to share your insights with all of us.
Thanks for great moderating.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes.
Thank you so much for a fabulous conversation, everyone.
And we hope you'll join us again in 2 weeks for our next conversation, and go to RIF.org for the next 2 films that are up. Thank you, panelists and Matt, so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.